There's an old saying in the Arab world, choose your neighbor before the house. A bad neighbor can be a misfortune, a good one, a blessing. Unfortunately, in geopolitics, you don't get to make this choice. You don't get to choose your neighbor. You just have to find a way to live with them. Fight when the need arises, compromise when possible. In West Asia, two powerful neighbors are trying this. Iran and Saudi Arabia. For decades, they fought for dominance, waged proxy wars, but now they're trying to bury the hatchet. Last week, 3 Iranian diplomats arrived in Saudi Arabia to take back posts at the OIC, Organization of Islamic Cooperation. This follows 5 rounds of talks between the two sides, talks that have been described as cordial, practical, and positive. Now, this is very significant. A major geopolitical churn is underway in West Asia. But what's driving it? What's behind this thaw between Iran and Saudi Arabia? What brought them to the negotiating table? Also, why were they fighting in the first place? Is their rivalry religious or political or both? How did this impact West Asia, and how will the rapprochement change the region? Hello and welcome to Gravitas Plus. I'm Palki Sharma Upadhyay. The roots of Saudi Arabia's rivalry with Iran are often sought in a 1,000-year-old religious schism, a schism between Sunnis and Shias, the two main branches of Islam. Iran and Saudi Arabia are on the opposing sides of this split. In the 17th century, the Safavid dynasty transformed Iran into a bastion of Shia Islam. In the 18th century, the House of Saud embraced an ultra-conservative version of Sunni Islam. This marked the onset of their sectarian rivalry. But it's important to not overstate the split. Much like Sunnis and Shias, Saudi Arabia and Iran share fundamental beliefs, and they've coexisted for centuries. In fact, every time their interests have not clashed directly, there have been a few moments of positive engagement. I'll give you examples. During the Cold War, they worked together to help the United States establish a solid front against the Soviet Union. They collaborated to contain Moscow's expansion in the Gulf. There was clear division of labor. Iran provided military capabilities to US-led forces, and Saudi Arabia provided funding and theological ammunition. Then in the 1960s, when the Egyptian army intervened in the Yemen war, Riyadh and Tehran came together to back Yemen's Shia monarch. Back in the day, they were called America's twin pillars for regional security. They shared good relations and diplomatic ties, probably because they were both governed by Western-backed monarchs. By 1978, Reza Pahlavi, the Shah of Iran, and King Khalid of Saudi Arabia had reached the zenith of their power. They maintained cordial ties and met on several occasions to launch joint programs to modernize their countries. But 1 year later, everything changed. Iran witnessed a revolution in 1979. Shia militias, backed by Ayatollah Khomeini, toppled the Shah. They took Iran from being a secular nation to a new kind of revolutionary theocracy. Iran started exporting its model and beliefs beyond its borders. The Ayatollah called upon Muslims to overthrow American-backed Arab rulers. The same year, 1979, there was a transition in Saudi Arabia too. One that sent the kingdom down the path of conservatism. The Grand Mosque in Mecca, the holiest site in Islam, was attacked by radical Islamists. The attack took Saudi Arabia from modernity to desert tribalism. The House of Saud took refuge in Wahhabism to cement its authority. It renewed ties with Sunni Wahhabi clerics and began exporting its beliefs to build influence. So to put it simply, after 1979, Iran and Saudi Arabia started drifting apart. They both set out on a quest of building influence. Both had the resources to do so. They also had a weak spot, a religious and ethnic minority in their oil-rich provinces. In Saudi Arabia, the eastern province had a significant Shia population. It also had most of the kingdom's oil reserves. The Saudi monarchy felt threatened by the unrest here. It started exerting control on the Shias and limiting their links to Iran. Same with Iran. It had a significant Sunni population living in the Khuzestan province. 80% of Iran's onshore oil reserves are also in this province. So the regime feared an ethno-religious upheaval here. It started cracking down on Sunni Muslims. Both Iran and Saudi Arabia amped up the us versus them rhetoric. They used the sectarian split as a political construct to rule at home and to dictate agendas in the neighborhood. The 2011 Arab Spring intensified this rivalry further. There were political revolutions across West Asia and Africa. Governments fell in Tunisia and Egypt. Crises erupted in Yemen, Syria, and Iraq. This resulted in a power vacuum, which was immediately exploited by Iran and Saudi Arabia. Both began racing to fill this void. They supported uprisings in states they were not close to. and opposed rebellions in states they considered allies. I'll give you a few examples. Bahrain, for example, Iran supported anti-government protests in the name of respecting the will of the people. Saudi Arabia did the opposite. It dispatched its army to help Bahrain's monarchy. In Syria, Saudi Arabia backed the rebels. It still does. It provides them generous military and financial assistance. Iran does the opposite. It supports the Assad regime in fighting rebel groups backed by Riyadh. In Lebanon, Iran supports the Hezbollah, a Shia militant group. Thanks to Iran, the Hezbollah controls a huge and heavily armed fighting force. Saudi Arabia has for the longest time supported the Lebanese government in taking on the Hezbollah. Then we have Yemen. Iran supports the Houthi rebels, a Shia militia group fighting the regime. Saudi Arabia, along with a coalition of Arab nations, helps the regime strike the Houthis. And finally, we have Israel. Militant group Hamas has been a close ally of Iran. Tehran helps the group fight for the Palestinian cause. Officially, Saudi Arabia does not support Israel, but the two are said to have formed a covert alliance with a joint interest of countering Iran. And these were just a few examples. There are many more. The rivalry between Saudi Arabia and Iran is reflected all over West Asia. In the pro-Saudi camp are Sunni states like the UAE, Bahrain, Kuwait, Jordan, and Egypt. In the pro-Iran camp are the Shia-dominated government of Iraq and the Bashar al-Assad regime of Syria. Split between their power play are Yemen, Lebanon, and Qatar. The religious fragmentation in these states, the prevailing divisions between Shias and Sunnis, feeds the Saudi-Iran rivalry. Things got worse in 2016 when Saudi Arabia executed a Shia cleric, Nimr al-Nimr, a popular figure among its Shia minority. He was highly critical of the Saudi monarchy. He wanted them to hold free and fair elections. Riyadh saw Iran's hand behind this activism, so it sentenced al-Nimr to death. His execution angered Shia Muslims the world over. Al-Nimr became a symbol of Shia oppression by the Saudis. Shia leaders warned of consequences. Protests were held in Iraq, Bahrain, Yemen, and Pakistan. The tipping point came when protesters in Iran set fire to the Saudi consulate in Mashhad and then to the Saudi embassy in Tehran. What followed was an immediate suspension of all ties. Bilateral relations became all but non-existent. Saudi Arabia and Iran refused to engage with each other. They stopped doing business and trade, even playing each other at sporting events for that matter. 6 years on, there's been a thaw. Courtesy what? Perhaps the withdrawal of third parties like America from the region. The US, remember, played a significant role in shaping the dynamics of this rivalry. Another reason is the losing charm of oil. Their most prized treasure, the key to their geopolitical might, the future of petrodollars, looks bleak. It's a mix of politics and economics that has forced Riyadh and Tehran to explore a compromise. Iran's reasons are largely economic. US sanctions are crushing its economy. Restoring ties with the second largest economy in West Asia will help Iran broaden regional trade, also reach out to several Sunni majority countries. For Saudi Arabia, the reasons are both economic and political. Crown Prince MBS is trying to diversify the economy, and for that he needs to change his country's image. A de-escalation with Iran could spell an end to its proxy wars. Also help MBS attract investments. He needs money to realize his much-touted Vision 2030. So at the end of the day, this warming up of ties is more about money than anything else. It won't spell the end of the decades-old conflicts. At best, bring a precarious peace. Well, we say anything is better than war.